after this 1-0 win against Celta de Vigo, I know that pretty much everybody falls into one of two camps and maybe a little bit of both. Camp 1 says that 3 uninspiring results in a row, that is not a good sign heading into the biggest match of the season against Inter Milan midweek. The other side says, hey, La Liga, you gotta suffer, you gotta get through it, and Barcelona did just that, winning 1-0, getting the 3 points, and heading into El Clasico next weekend on the top of the table. And that's really what matters here. Now, I think there is some skepticism that Barcelona can turn the corner. And that skepticism is what keeps those, I think, who are feeling a bit negative, validated. And that's totally fair to feel that way. I definitely am going to feel that way tomorrow on the podcast when I really delve into this. In the same respect, coming after a game like this, I always feel like I want to side with those who say, hey, the next match is the next match. They might turn this thing around because even though there were 3 uninspiring results, one of which was a loss, the other 2 were victories. As bad as it may seem, this match was about rotation, and it was about getting a result by any means necessary. And Barcelona did just that. So let's get into it. The 5 headlines from Barcelona's 1-0 win against Celta de Vigo. 1 is Gavi gets vertical. We do have to talk about the goal because it's the one that decided this game. There was a lot of pushback, especially from me after the Inter Milan game. We also discussed that with Lavon on the podcast about how Pedri, because he receives the ball so deep and likes to dribble and penetrate in the way that he does, control the game as such, it's really difficult to have him having to also make those forward runs into those half spaces between the center back and the outside backs. It's a lot to ask of Pedri. That means Gavi on the right side absolutely must do that. And today it wasn't necessarily on the right side, it was right side, it was left side. Really good movement from Gavi up top. And because Gavi got vertical as one of the high interiors, Lewandowski drops in deep, it's what leads to the goal. A great run by Gavi, gets in behind, crosses over, and while Celta de Vigo should have done better on it, Pedri cleans it up and scores the one and only goal that this game needed. Now I must say not to be a bit too negative, but it is easier to pull out a 4-3-3 and get in those half spaces than it is against a 5 at the back that Inter Milan is going to have. And to say that Inter Milan is certainly a bit more pronounced at the back than the Celta de Vigo side that has been shipping some goals at times this season. But you have to like what you saw from Gavi today, his movement, the energy, the tackling. Maybe he deserved a yellow or 2, but that's okay. Either way, the 18-year-old had a performance that Barcelona needed in the games that they have to suffer in. And it does seem to be an odd thing too, same thing with last week against Mallorca, that the worse the match, it seems like the more important a player Gavi becomes. I don't know what that says about the 18-year-old, but it definitely says something. I want to thank OneFootball for sponsoring this video. OneFootball is the app that I use to stay up to date on everything FC Barcelona. But more importantly, because you know I'm watching every minute of Barcelona action, it does help me stay up to date with all the teams that Alemany might be scouting and looking at players for the next big transfer window. With a custom tailored homepage, stay up to date with breaking news, live scores, and even transfer news. While on the go, you can check with matches in live time and watch those La Liga highlights afterwards. And especially if you're in a place defending the good name of La Liga against other teams. Say in the UK and Ireland, you can watch La Liga highlights on the go and let them know that it's not just Real Madrid and Barcelona, regardless of what the table says. So use the link down in the description below for a free download of the OneFootball app on Android or iOS to put all your football in one place. And you also help out a tiny Barca channel like this one too. Thanks again to OneFootball. Now back to all things FC Barcelona. 2 is explain that no call. Now, I know that because Barcelona got the 3 points, and I know that we can understand where the referee was coming from, as to saying that Rafinha probably didn't need to fall over with the contact he got from Javi Gailan. I still look at that moment in the match as a really important moment. Because I think if you've been following me for a few years now, you know that I don't really get huffity-puffity about the penalties or non-calls or things that I don't really feel like matter, or where I can see where the referee is coming from. But for this one, you either give him a yellow for simulation because he dove, or that's a clear-cut penalty because the leg of Gailan obstructs Rafinha's path. Rafinha dribbles around him, and I think that it's totally fair for that to go in the books. And what's frustrating about that is I think this penalty, and this non-penalty I should say, is based on reputation, that maybe it's Rafinha or the Brazilian thing or wingers or whatever it is. For some reason, this was not called a penalty, where I think even if Pedri had had that same situation and had gone down in the same way, I think they actually give a penalty just because even the way that a body is shaped. Because Rafinha works so quick, I think it's this idea that he's going to go down or wants to go down with that contact. And why I'm complaining about it now, if you will, or frustrated by this call, is because at that point in the game, Barcelona were up 1-0. If they get a PK and score that PK, especially Lewandowski sees the ball go in the back of the net, then Barcelona up 2-0. And then maybe that whole second half where they lost control of the match, which again is not about the penalty call at all, but maybe Barcelona don't put themselves in that bad situation because they're up 2-0. Maybe it's a little easier, or let's say not to take the foot off the gas, but maybe it's a little bit easier to guide that game to its end when you've got a 2-goal cushion at home. A lot different than the 1-0 that Barcelona were screaming and sprinting towards the finish line with. A little bit of a silver lining, but that silver lining also dulled because while Rafinha was good at times in that first half, there were times when he was also absent. And it's not a good sign that Rafinha has now joined Ferran Torres and Ansu Fati as being forward for Barcelona who aren't in great form. And Dembélé, even his decision-making late in that game, I know Xavi always wants to go for it. Maybe that's the instruction. But there is this idea that if Dembélé had acted on his own when he didn't go to the corner flag and decided to just go right in on goal like he did in stoppage time when that game was still in the balance, well, that means that Dembélé isn't really making good decisions at the right time either. So you need a mentally informed Dembélé, and Rafinha, Ansu, and Ferran not finding their way. That leaves a lot on Lewandowski to go against Inter Milan, and we saw what happened midweek when they had three of their center backs, all three center backs, constantly on top of Lewandowski. And that's not going to work for this Barcelona attack, and that's what I take out of this game is why I'm a bit worried about Inter Milan, because Rafinha not excelling on the right wing either today, that's not a good sign. 3 is Ter Stegen and Pique and Yikes. And the Yikes doesn't really fall under Balde too much, or an individual. Alba was just fine, Alonso was just fine, Barcelona got a clean sheet, and all of those things. And this is where those contradictions come again. There was a lineup that Xavi put out there with Alba, Alonso, Pique, and Balde as a right back. We saw Balde last week against Mallorca, and I thought today, just easy on him, that it was much, much better. His back post defending was much better. I thought he was quicker to the spots. He did get beat once late in that game, but that happens to a lot of wingbacks, especially young wingbacks. So I thought he was much better, even getting forward on that right side with Rafinha in front of him. So that was a good sign from Balde. Alba, yeah, I mean, there were moments where it was good offensively. There were moments when it was bad defensively, 2 or 3 in particular, but he also did just enough. Alonso also did just enough, had that important block in the game. And this defense was really built today by individual performances, though, by Pique and Ter Stegen. Ter Stegen was phenomenal again, continues to be so important. He has saved 19 of his 20 shots on target faced in the Liga this season. The 95% save percentage for him, the best tally in the league this season, and the best in the top 5 European leagues among goalkeepers with 5+ saves. Ter Stegen has been a rock, and for all the criticism he has received for the last 2 or 3 seasons, for him to bounce back this way, I just want to remind you that 1 or 2 bad performances from him should not nullify how good he has been for the first month plus. In this game in particular, took a knock, 85th minute, gets that kick-out save, not being 100%, then in stoppage time, another save, even though that was offside, just showing you how good he has been this year. And Pique as well, for everything we can talk about off the field and his role changing and the pressure that Xavi has put on him even to leave, Laporta's comments about him not taking the salary reduction just today, Pique still on the field. His offensive, tremendous today. He moved the ball really quickly from side to side, diagonally, and stretching Celta de Vigo out. What happened in the first half at least. Defensively, everything that needed to be done, Gerard Pique put out all the fires today with that makeshift back line. And that kind of leads us to that final point here, with the Yikes. The Yikes I don't think is actually for any of the 5 players I just mentioned, but more for Xavi. There were no poor individual performances, and that's why Barcelona managed to survive this one and get out of it with a clean sheet. But for Xavi moving forward, yeah, we can make excuses about all those injuries, but you do worry about not even this back line, but what happens when you're facing up against better opponents. That seems to be the issue, where this back line, this is a good sign for the Liga, that this kind of back line, even makeshift back line, and his system, that being Xavi's defensive system, is good enough to get results in the Liga. The problem is when you make that step up to the Champions League, or those quality teams at higher competition, then this whole thing, the whole house of cards defensively, falls apart. So it's a lot about Xavi and figuring out how he's going to improve this squad, even with all those injuries, more than it is about the individual performances today. Because once again, credit to the 5 people on that back line. They did enough to get the clean sheet. 4 is for those who wait. I know prior to this game, you heard me on the last podcast. I was getting excited about Marc Casado and Chadi Riyad. Was Pablo Torre finally get an opportunity? And yet the subs we saw were Dembélé, Ansu Fati, Frankie de Jong. And I kind of had to shake myself a little bit and remind myself that those important subs are coming on not because Torre or Casado or Riyad aren't good enough players and won't be good enough players, but it's a reminder just how important this time of the season is and how important each of those individual subs is. It's so much more important. As much as we'd like to see one of those young kids become the next answer, as Barcelona are looking for answers to solve their problems, other than players getting healthy, you have to look within the players that are already in the first team, already on the field. So exciting as Pablo Torre was, you had to have Pedri on the field to start this game, scored the goal. You can tell that he's Barcelona's most important outfield player, that being Pedri. So he has to start this game, and he comes off then for Frenkie de Jong, who had to get a run out because he's going to have to play some kind of significant role against Inter Milan, for which Pablo Torre is not going to get that responsibility. In the same way, having Pique in good form, and I guess Marcos Alonso, that being the argument that Riyad probably should have started over Alonso, but having Alonso on the field, having just come off that game against Inter, he might also have to play some kind of role midweek. So you're going to want him playing with confidence, and you also might say that, hey, you've played in the Premier League at the left center back spot. We're not going to destroy your confidence by putting you on the bench and starting a 19-year-old over you. You can't do that to Alonso, unfortunately. And I think people are actually overcorrecting on Alonso a little bit. I just want to throw this in here, that I was not a fan of that transfer. I don't think anybody is. It's a one-year deal. Most likely he'll be replaced. I can't imagine him even around Barcelona next season. That said, I think people not wanting him on the field at all, it's not like he's been a complete albatross. He was fine against Bayern Munich. He was not the man for the job against Inter Milan, but it also, again, wasn't necessarily his fault. I think it was a bad choice by Xavi to put him in that situation. We've only seen him 4 or 5 times, and I haven't really seen enough of him to call him some kind of abject failure that has to be a pariah from the field for Barcelona. I think there's a role for him, and all the other injuries are forcing him into a role that too many of us are not comfortable with, because he's now being asked to do too much, way more than what I think he was signed to do. And for Pablo Torre, I gotta have to remind myself too, that if he's a kind of kid or a kind of player that after just 2 months at FC Barcelona is saying, hey, they're not giving me minutes, they're not following the plan, they're not following my plan, then I gotta go elsewhere, then we gotta let those kind of kids go. The ones that are willing to adapt and take time and fight for their spot, because Pablo Torre is good enough to get some minutes this season. And he will. In the Copa del Rey, potentially in the league, at times when Barcelona are going to need him. There will be other injuries. I mean, God forbid in the midfield there aren't any more, but there might be. World Cup, who knows what's going to happen. So Pablo Torre will get some opportunities. Riyad might get 1 or 2. Casado might get 1 or 2. But as we've seen with Gavi and Balde and Pedri and Ansu, if those other teenagers are good enough, they're probably already going to be playing. And they might eventually. They might develop into the players that are going to be a part of the first team. But thinking about this Celta de Vigo game in the landscape of October, with Inter Milan on Wednesday and El Clasico next week, I have to kind of remind myself, you can't see the youngsters in this kind of game unless you absolutely need to see them. Meaning one of those other center backs had gone down, hence why even Eric Garcia came in off the bench as the other center back option. And 5 is one eye on Inter. Certainly in this game, it's kind of hypocritical for us to go doom and gloom and say, oh, Barcelona played poorly, therefore they're going to play poorly against Inter Milan, because I think everybody agreed before this match. I did it on the podcast too. I was overlooking this match because Barcelona should have overlooked this match. All they had to do was get the 3 points. This is the kind of 3 points that can win you the league at the end of the year. When you're playing poorly, when you're more focused on the Champions League midweek, and you still get a result at home, that's enough to win the league when the dust settles. That's the bright side. Obviously, the bad part is that because Barcelona were rotating again and focused on Inter Milan, they didn't play their best. And now you're worried that they're still going to not play their best midweek. But if they go out and all this makes sense, then all the doom and gloom that we had about this match doesn't really matter. It's all spilled milk, right? So this result and how we feel after this one is completely conditioned on Inter Milan. I can tell you the same thing. They played poorly today. So if they go out and they stake it up for the 4th straight game on Wednesday, this match is going to feel so much worse. And I'm going to have to eat any positive crow that I may have been trying to feed you here. But if Xavi comes out with his best 11 possible come Wednesday and Barcelona go out and dominate Inter Milan, say 2-0 or 3-0, and get the job done, then this will all have made sense. And all the crying we're doing today won't matter all that much. That is definitely going to be the theme of the podcast tomorrow. Those big ideas, those big questions preparing for Inter and how the Celta de Vigo match either did that or didn't. So look out for the podcast tomorrow. And because this week has Inter Milan and Real Madrid, El Clasico at the end of it, the preview, all those different things, I think I've got a piece of content coming out basically every day. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. I'd really appreciate it. Give us a like. Also this week, the other thing I'm going to ask you is just share it. Share it somewhere. You know me, I'm too busy making content to actually even share my own material. Not great. So I'd love it if more people jumped on board. This is the kind of week, win or lose, this is the kind of week where young fans or fans who are ready for the most important matches and watching FC Barcelona, this is where new fans are made. Hopefully, new fans are made with victories as well. So just share the content, greatly appreciated. And as always, until next time, Forza Barca.